that's really it. Get out as fast as you can. And it is with great pleasure, actually, that we're here today to introduce José M Naharro-Calderón, who's a professor of literature, in Spanish and Portuguese literature, so it's Lusophone as well, isn't it, which is interesting, at the University of Maryland in the US. Now, José Maria has come to us through the group, really, because you know each other, and I thought this was wonderful that we were able to make this connection. José Maria's latest book is this one, and I think you'll see a cover over here. And the lecture today will be concerned really with Calderón, which is a literary figure that he writes about, but also about the diaspora that takes place in Spain as a consequence of political unrest and civil war. But then all the connections that diaspora then continues to have over the years. So I think that you will be in a better position to explain this. And if you welcome our speaker, we will get on with it.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the invitation. I'm really touched by it. And I speak to the ground which contemplate us. I hope my talk doesn't put the building on fire, so you can follow Jennifer's recommendations for evacuation. And what I want to do, and eventually in the postdoc, I would like Ruth to come up and try to deal with some of the ideas that I will bring through the talk, is to map out a few of the main stopovers that we could identify through the presence of the Spanish exiles in the US. And of course, history never starts at a particular date. We need to always go back and forth and find linkages between them. But indeed, this period of 1939, 1977, touched Spain, divided Spain between exiles and, let's say, inner Spaniards. And I will also navigate back and forth, and eventually I will stop over right here at the Rock, which had an extraordinary importance in that debate, as I would like to point out. I would say that, of course, among the few exiles that came to the U.S. in 1939, because we will see that the U.S. had an extremely restricted immigration policy that started in 1924, when it shut off its routes to large immigrations in the particularly the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. The U.S. was basically restricted to intellectuals, okay, and to people that could eventually get employed in places of higher learning, universities. And of course, the key figure that I'm also going to focus is Juan Ramón Jiménez, and of course, his companion Zenobia Camprubí, who were professors at my institution, the University of Maryland, between 1943 and 1951, when they lived in the Washington area and Maryland. So, of course, as you know, Juan Ramón eventually became the Nobel Prize in 1956, and the Nobel Prize was reserved to Juan Ramón Jiménez in representation of a whole generation of poets. So, of course, among them, many of his disciples that eventually turned against him. One of them, the most significant one, in fact, were a pair, the Exiles and They had huge part But interestingly enough, and going back to the author, stopover, Jorge wrote a poem in one of his exile poems entitled Gibraltar no tengas miedo. And basically, my bad memory recalls it as es el único lugar en donde 273 años, en el aniversario de la toma de Gibraltar, en el 273 aniversario, es el único lugar donde españoles no han matado a españoles. Gibraltar no tengas. So, of course, this is exile is a process. It's a going back and forth. It's an expectation of when will it end, when may it start. Also, of course, the historical events are pushing people out. So it's a very difficult gauging, paradigm in a sense. And of course, it has evolved from other paradigms: ostracism, heterism, expulsion, and now today we talk about migrancy or diasporas. Let me go back in time and then, of course, link the presence of Spaniards in the U.S. to exile and to their own points of views to what was the newer republic. And I would like to point out to Valentín de Foronda and Luis Leonís, who were diplomats in Philadelphia, they wrote two books, Apuntes de Imperio de los Estados Unidos de la América Septentrional, and España, Estados Unidos de América, que está motivada para todo el mundo de 1919, con una noticia con la estadística de aquel país. And the interesting part is that already there is a Spanish exile in the U.S. in actually 1814, when Ferdinand VII comes back and abolishes the Paris Constitution. So, here to this territory. And actually, San Agustín de la Florida, in southern part of the United States, there's the only money left that I know, maybe in the state, to the Constitution of Paris. The model is that the Constitution is brought all over the territory, and that's, of course, Ferdinand VII, make sure that it disappeared. Well, the order was never carried out and executed in San Antonio, Florida, and we still have San Agustín de la Florida, and we still have La Plaza de la Constitución. A big deal. And it's interesting how, in a sense, Valentín de Foronda, of course, enlightenment, and Luis Leonís talk about the United States, talk about the young republic, not see in the young republic a number of problems and defects, and I will quote some of these. Foronda, for example, talks about the economy, already a very capitalistic economy, que resulta de esta economía que todo lo que miran objetos públicos es miserable en este país. Already the public interest is demised in favor of the private interests. O adelantos de la alfabetización más extendida que en Europa, pero que es utilizada para servir intereses partidistas y a la codicia y la ambición del dinero. O Onís talks about the American pride. Se consideran superior a los demás hombres y miran su república como el único establecimiento que hay sobre la tierra fundado sobre las bases sólidas y grandes, hermoseado por la sabiduría destinado a ser un día el coloso más sublime del poder humano y la maravilla del universo. Foronda adds, al
están estas gentes al referido lujo y a tan enorme consumo, no pueden ya prescindir ni de lo uno ni de lo otro. Y aquí lo que produce los embarazos en el que el país se halla. Eunice talks about 1819, there's a economic recession in the US, and interestingly enough, the executive power decides to protect the banks that have done already foolish things, and the retorts son demasiado poderosos para dejarlos caer. So, the Spaniards are already into what the U.S. Republic is, not necessarily a land of the liberal and liberal, which is, as we know, a word that was presented in Paris as the defenders of freedom, and that traveled all over the world. This is a naturally Spanish word, coined to the political spectrum of the times and beyond. And if we continue, this small itinerary and vast on the other side, we see that there are, of course, early connections between the US and Spain, particularly the fact that Spanish is being taught for the first time in William and Mary, one of the words of Thomas Jefferson, and then that there are a number of Hispanists, historians, poets, Longfellow. The first Hispanist as George Stickner, who comes, from Boston, Harvard, and actually reads, those huge libraries like this one that are on sale due to the 1837 Mendizábal disenchantment. And that's why Harvard has such a huge library of Spanish studies coming from the Middle Ages and Golden Age and the Enlightenment. And then, of course, a number of books that are written in Spain, the Richard Ford, the George Orwell's, and all of this already settles in the American mind. So, U.S. universities are already prepared to receive Spanish intellectuals in 1939 because Hispanism is flourishing, and Hispanism is flourishing particularly because at the end of World War I, German becomes a despised language and culture, a suspicious language and culture, and Pan-Americanism, Pan-Hispanism is the thing to do, and this is the way to train future U.S. students in U.S. universities. Spanish takes off. Richard Kagan, in the fascinating book, calls it the Spanish craze, because once Spain is defeated in Cuba, Puerto Rico, one in the Philippines, no longer a threat, and it can be consumed actually by the market, by the university market in that sense. Meanwhile, in Spain, we have also a process of U.S. coming to Spain, and particularly the setup in Madrid of the International Institute for Girls in 1889, I believe, in which these Protestant organization comes to actually spread the good word, in that Catholic country, to these girls that come to get their education, and the Instituto Internacional, which of course is still there, eventually is replicated by a number of Spanish institutions like la Institución de Enseñanza, la Junta de Estudios, la Residencia de Estudiantes, la Residencia de Señoritas, the Lyceum Club, and there we find people like Zenobia Camprubí. So that linkage is already extraordinarily strong, and there are a number of which will eventually travel to the US in, let's say, the first group of exiles, which are the ones that are found in the US prior to the defeat in 1939. Fernando de los Rios, who is the Spanish Republic ambassador in Washington, Americo Castro, eventually going to go to Princeton, Federico Dionis, who is the director of La Casa Hispanica, another institution in New York. We know, of course, the earlier travels of Juan Ramón Jiménez and Zenobia, the ideas of Garrison Library, 1916, and of course, Poeta and Morio, which of course, poems were not published, the Roca poems were not published, until after his death, actually, in Exiles are cultural in Mexico. But there were also invisible immigrants to the US in the 19th century, between the 1850s and the 1920s, when the law shuts up. And as you can see, there are a certain number of them. And where do they go? Well, they go particularly to the mining towns in Pennsylvania, in the Appalachians, in West Virginia, and California. And they send a fascinating record of their presence. And of course, comes the war, the Spanish Civil War, and from the U.S. come the international brigades. And this Abraham Lincoln and George Washington battalion, eventually is one of the first places where African Americans find themselves integrated. Not only in combat positions along with their other U.S. comrades, but in commanding positions. And of course, the presence of the U.S. Medical Bureau to aid the Spanish Republic. All of this is organized by a very important presence of these prior immigrants, that are in the U.S., particularly in the California and New York area, New York City, New Jersey, of course, and of course the importance of the U.S. Communist Party at the time, and of course the idea of the Popular Fronts, which is also something which surfaces in the U.S. Eventually, the coming back of these, as they were called, premature anti-fascists in the U.S., brought the Medical Bureau and its environment to become now a organization not of medical support but of refugee support. Not on the battlefield, but as the Spanish were crossing the borders into exile, and among them, of course, we find again Edward Vasky, who was the head of the Medical Bureau group, and eventually the setup in Toulouse, thanks to U.S. money through that head Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee, of a mythical hospital, the Walter B. Cannon, who is professor of medicine at Harvard, Hôpital Varsovie, which has nothing to do with Warsaw or Poland, or Warsaw, which is a place where you drink wine in Pomosai, and a hospital that had inherited ways of treating, inclusive ways of treating patients. The patients were Spanish refugees coming back from the concentration camps in Germany, Mauthausen, etc. And they were integrated with medical care that had already been put in place by Spanish doctors at the Hospital de San Juan, Barcelona. And eventually shut down by the Red Scare, the Cold War, spelled not only from the US but also through France, the Bolero Paprika decree of the French government, in which the Spanish communists are sent out of France. They lose their refugee status, and many of them have to emigrate to Eastern countries. And of course, the persecution of their American backers, among them, not through the House of American Activities, and the persecution of the Hollywood 10, which were backers of this joint refugee aid committee and refused in front of the House of American Activities, who first was persecuting Nazis, so pro-Nazis, pro-fascists, and eventually persecuted pro-communists, and they all refused to declare anything that had to do with this Hôpital Varsovie in Toulouse. They were found in contempt of Congress and sent to a year jail. All of them, not victims, the writers, the Hollywood 10. Among them, of course, we found Alba Bici, who had been to the International Brigade in Spain, and eventually he was the subject of a very interesting film, but not very good, by Fennecan, not Spanish drugs. No? Okay, among already the groups that are in place in the US into this immigration process, exile process, pre-war process, what I call, and we're going to talk about that, intra-exile. Now, exile is not happening yet, okay? Are the Sociedades Hispánicas Confederadas. 1937, the US government said to all these miscellaneous groups, lefties, no, dangerous lefties, you better put yourself in one place so we can make sure you don't do anything foolish, okay? So the Sociedades Hispánicas Confederadas will gather from 1937 to 1977 about 60,000 members, all over the US. They will carry out a very interesting cultural activities, theater, poetry, Athenaeums, of course, libertarian, many of them of libertarian extract, and very influential among young US intellectuals, among them Noam Chomsky, who I had the pleasure to interview in the proceedings of this conference that we did in Maryland in 2019, and Chomsky talked about his memories of going down from Philadelphia to New York to talk to these Spanish anarchists that have been here since 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and getting his, awareness of what his view of the war was. So, publications, España Libre, in which, for example, all these cartoons, appear, etc. So, not only intellectuals, but also working people, fighting people, struggling people. And now I would like to very briefly give you an idea of my idea coming across a number of texts by the intellectuals that come to the US. And particularly through the realm of Juan Ramón Jiménez, who basically touches all of the spectrum. What my idea may be of an exile paradigm when we deal with literary exile texts. And of course, I come out from seminal texts, George Steiner, who is still actually the most like Karen Kaplan, the idea of extraterritoriality, minor literature, detatorialized literature, out of the focus. But out of the focus, you are able to get into the focus, actually, because you are seeing things from out into within. And of course, we deal with these different moments historically. There's an expecting phase, in which the exiles are still hoping that Franco will go, and then, of course, there's a declining phase, which no end in sight until he goes away, and it doesn't go away. And of course, there is this word I will call, and this is the most interesting moment, of course, phase or paradigm is the inter-exile. So it's the possibility of looking at both sides, of weighing all your possibilities, and in trying to construe a working phase of exile and going back and forth, actually. And this is what Juan Ramón Jiménez does really, okay? And his theory on modernism touches it all. Actually, he understands that there's a crisis on modernity that has happened that comes a long way from the 19th century, and that he's actually a part, a living and moving part of it. And it's fascinating how his vision, because it's easy to talk now, okay? It's not easy to talk. And visualize this in the 1930s, 1940s, we're in the midst of it, okay? And I want to quote that el laberinto es la única forma de salir. You're trapped. And there's of course all this play with time and space. Juan Ramón is not a great reader, he's a genius, he has read Einstein. So he's into relativity. So time and space is no longer Newtonian, it's Einsteinian. And that can be applied to poetry as well. Okay, and that opens a whole completely new possibility, which I call supra-exile. I mean, you can actually go up to the zenith, you can actually avoid our theoretically human time and space. But you can also fall into the cracks. You can go to infra-exile. You can fall into despair, which is the traditional Roman, Greek, classical way, Dante's way of looking at exile. You're out. You struck out, you're out of the game. You have no chance. You can only cry. Okay, this is an operating epicnis interdit, you cannot carry water, you cannot make fire. So you are bound to be dead. And Socrates chooses not suicide rather than going into limbo. And this is one of the most common ways in which writers deal with exile. They cry. And another theoretician of Spanish exile, Henry Kelman, they say, well, Spanish always cry. And they never get up to circumstances and bite the bullet and go. Okay, but there's some understanding why Spanish are always crying, because in a sense there are some of them, many of them in a familiar territory. America Latina, Spanish is heard, written, and exchanged, and yet nobody pays attention to them in the motherland. So we have, as I say, these different moments, intra, supra, inter, exile. Of course, Juan Ramón starts first by intra-exile. They come out very quickly, 1936. Finally sends them as diplomats. So that may not be an exile, actually. So actually the Republic may win the war. And we stand here and everybody like that. And yet, as they start settling down, one of the comments that Juan Ramón and Zenobia have in their correspondence is how quickly, in fact, some of their immigration, migrancy, diaspora colleagues leave. I mean, Menendez Pidal, there he goes, he goes back. He's going to lose his position. He stayed. Okay. Or how many of these intellectuals are close to communist thesis suddenly find themselves offshore when the German, the Soviet Nazi pact of 1939, August 1939. How do you explain that? Our heroes suddenly embraced our foe. So, interestingly enough, Juan Ramón does have periods of difference, no? In which he said, I cannot go any longer. El destierro de mi lengua diferente, superior a toda alegría, a toda indiferencia, a toda libertad, a toda pena, no la puedo soportar. Okay? Suicide is the next step. Depression. Okay? I cannot write. And yet, he's always thinking about what is my position as a poet, as an intellectual, as a writer in war. And he said, I cannot write about war. I cannot write in war. I can only be a helping person, a helping man. The only poets that are actually poets in war to him are Miguel Unamuno, Federico Garza, Antonio Machado, Miguel Hernández. The ones that put their sense stake in the struggle. Okay. And now the dilettantes that write. Now, somehow Jorge Guilles and Pedro Salinas that use such work. And yet, he's also able to rise above this infra moment, which everything is terrible, and he writes the poem. He starts writing, in Florida in the 1940s, the flag extensions of the dunes of Coral Gables. He writes this to become a three-piece set between 1940 and 1954, SPAP. And you read here, this is a moment that he's gone to New York, and he's on top of the, if you picture New York, northern Manhattan, Washington Bridge, lakes, Manhattan and New Jersey, y por debajo de Washington Bridge, el puente más amigo de Nueva York, corre el campo dorado de mi infancia. Bajé lleno a la calle, me abrió el viento, la ropa, el corazón, vi caras buenas, en el jardín de St. John the Divine, New York City Cathedral. Los chocos verdes eran de Madrid, hablé con un perro y un gato en español, y los niños del coro, lengua eterna igual del paraíso de la luna, cantaban con campanas de San Juan en el rayo del sol derecho, vivo donde el cielo flotaba hecho armonía violeta y oro, iris ideal que bajaba y subía que bajaba. Dulce con este sol era el amor. Salí por Amsterdam, estaba allí la luna, morning side, Amsterdam, Amsterdam City. El aire era tan puro, frío, no fresco, en él venía vida de primavera nocturna y el sol estaba dentro de la luna y de mi cuerpo. El sol presente, el sol que nunca más me dejaría los huesos solos, sol en sangre y hiel, y entré cantando ausente en la arboleda de la noche, y el río que se iba bajo Washington Bridge, con el sol aún hacia mi España, por mi oriente, a mi oriente de mayo de Madrid, un sol ya muerto, pero vivo, un sol presente, pero ausente, un sol respondo vital, carmín, un sol carmín vital en el verdor, por mi oriente, but the sun doesn't rise on Washington Bridge. The sun is coming down on the west side, and yet it's rising on the east in the greater. That's the relativity of time and space. I could go up and back, left and right, on all corners, and I can engulf it, or in this engulfed prose stroke that has no beginning, en donde los dioses no tuvieron más sustancia de la que tengo yo. I am actually the born and reborn creator, and I can cover it all, and we can enter within that engulfing process of creativity. spatio, third stroke, no? But yet I have this inner self, no? Which is telling me, but you're here. Okay? This is not a permanent stage. Calla, segundo yo, que hablas como yo y que no hablas como yo, calla. Okay? I cannot transcend, into that mystical level. Eventually I'm broken. Okay, so you can see now how the paradigm shifts. Okay? To the upper, to the lower, to the left, and to the right. And he's not shutting himself off. He's taking a stance. No? And he's aiming at, for example, Ortega. And he's going to defend Antonio Machado. And through Antonio Machado, he's going to defend himself because he's already been low, saying, look at Machado, he's in the US, he's in the America, he's left. No? Coward. Okay. And he writes one of the most of the elegies on Antonio Machado. In 1940. And of course, he's dealing with the debate of should the poet shut up his tongue in war and act as the solidarious person, or should he write about it? No? And this is actually something that we see in U.S. publications all the time. And he's in touch with the American poets as usual. He's attentive to what's going on in U.S. poetry. And of course he has this clashes and talks about Neruda. Neruda is actually not the poet that, but eventually recognizes that Neruda represents quite well a certain feeling of representing the Americans. He has this capacity of going back and forth in his stance. And he's always saying that existe mucha poesía de buena calidad entre nuestros contemporáneos. Muchos críticos y editores buscan el valor poético en lo que es sectario. El comunismo, por ejemplo, siento grandes simpatías hacia ciertos de los aspectos económicos del comunismo, pero no creo en el hecho de ser comunista añada valor alguno a un escritor como pretende cierto traductor hispanoamericano, bla bla bla. You have to dare to say that in that environment. Or eventually he's in touch with the New Republic, a very progressive publication in Washington, and we will see one of the editors is going to become one of the key figures that Juan Ramón Jiménez and Zenobia deal with, and Wallace with Malcolm Cowley. And again, he said, if Schmidt is included in the book, then Brown must be left out, and what about Mueller, who doesn't write very well, but he's still a capital fellow, blah, blah, blah. What he says, Frost is one of my books in here. Juan Ramón and Zenobia, when they are in Washington, here in this Rochester house on 16th Street, still there, and across the Meridian Park, the title of his 1945, candidate to the vice presidency in the Democratic Convention of August of 1944, and sidetracked by the Democrat machinery at that convention. 5 minutes before he was supposed to be inducted as the candidate. What do you know? Henry Delano Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, died in January 1945. His vice president would have been president at the time. He was Harry Truman, a conservative that eventually gave in to the idea of the Cold War. Henry Wallace would have been the vice president of the United States. And I think the course of history, and this is maybe a dystopian thought, would have changed, and I think I can prove it. But actually, Zenobia meets Wallace. Juan Ramón is ill and they can't go. She has, of course, good connection, and she goes to the Customs Club, and the height of the political aristocracy in Washington goes to the Customs Club. And eventually, the Wallaces and the community become extremely good friends. Mrs. Wallace teaches cooking to Zenobia. Zenobia teaches Spanish to Mrs. Wallace, and Juan Ramón and Henry Wallace click. Why? Because actually Wallace, not only he is all of this, but he's a historian. He has read the listics. He knows some Cornell Blues and John across by heart. And he's fully involved in trying to keep Spain, fascist Spain, out of the conflict, World War II. And he's fully involved trying to get Franco out. And he's getting now quite a intellectual support from people like Franco. And not only that, he's a progressive candidate. He's actually in a typical United States, all of this. And this is what the color this looks like. Here we have Juan Ramón talking about La Negrita Libertador. And here has some views, the Harvard Renaissance, talking about what racism and fascism are. Negroes of America are tired of the world divided, superficial on the basis of blood and color, but in reality on the basis of political power. Rich with the poor, no matter what their color. We Negroes of America are tired of the world, and it's responsible for any group of people to say to another, you have no right to happiness, freedom, or your joy life. We are tired of the world of forever, we work for someone else, and the profits are not ours. We declare this at the second Intellectual Congress in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, 1937, to come back to, again, the discriminated and separated US. But actually, Wallace had written a fascinating little book called The Century of the Common Man. And you have here some of these quotes, these Spanish. And Juan Ramón was going through a process in which he was developing his poetical politics, and the idea of a poetical social human being, coming from the idea of racionalismo in Spanish, escuela de despensa, religión, cultivo y agricultura. Henry Wallace pedía religión, cultivo y agricultura. So, there are points of linkage between Wallace and Juan Ramón, not only ideologically, but also, as said, and above all, and this is the interesting link, Roosevelt names Wallace director of the Board of Economic Warfare and supplies priorities in nutrition. So actually, he's a key person to try to gather raw materials away from the Axis onto the other side. several trips, and Wallace is the first U.S. representative, no, received by the masses in America. They love Wallace, and they love the Allied cause, and eventually the Latin American republics that are still flimsy and have not thrown their lot onto the Allied side eventually accept and go into the US side and refuse to sell raw materials to the Axis. But Wallace also, under the coattails of another Latin-American intellectual, José M Naharro-Calderón, who is the General Secretary of the Confederación de Trabajadores de Mexico and eventually Vice President of the World Trade Union Federation. This will be wiped out by the CIA in the mid-40s, of course, no? Is in tune with the Wallace doctrine. And another interesting figure, Francis Perkins, who is the Secretary of Labor, and who defends that actually this commerce between Latin America and other countries and the West has to be done according to fair wages and the presence of trade unions to defend the workers. And this is the stance that Wallace is defending himself, or of course, not the setup of the network of Social Security in the US. No? So, no, the fascists in most American countries tell the people that the reason wages will not buy as much as in the way of goods is because the anti-imperial, the fascists in America learn to speak and not neighbors. Well, interesting enough, Wallace is also a part of an interesting subgroup, which is the United States Commercial Corporation. And the United States Commercial Corporation is the instance that is trying to buy the materials. Actually, is the one that has theoretically the money, but it depends, of course, goes through the Department of Finance, to the Secretary of Finance, and people don't see it that way. They don't see why you should spend in a market which goes up and down, particularly around in Spain, tungsten, wolfram, which of course makes the armor for the tanks, and that the Nazis are exporting actively from Portugal and Spain, why you should spend that money into trying to stop that trade. And in documents that come out of those times, Vice President Wallace, as chairman of the Economic Defense Board, took over the pleading of the case and went head in head with the Department of Commerce. Interestingly enough, across from that building that tall building, that high-rise building on 16th Street, where Juan Ramón Jiménez and Zenobia Camprubí lived, was this building, right across. It was supposed to be the vice presidency residence of the United States, built in the 1920s by George Oakley for Calvin Coolidge. Eventually, Wallace should have lived there, but it was not. Eventually, Calvin Coolidge became president. The idea was forgotten. It became the Spanish embassy in 1926 during the dictatorship of Premio Nobel. So actually, across on 16th Street, from Juan Ramón Jiménez, Wallace lives on Connecticut Avenue, is the now Francoist embassy on 16th Street. And who is there? Well, the Francoist diplomats. And what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to play their game. No, they're cajoling the Nazis, they're cajoling the Allies, and they're trying to get the best out of everything. Maybe they will enter war with the Axis, maybe they will not. And above all, in the first phases of relations with the US, they are international interest by the US administration, particularly through the AT&T company, the telephone company, which belongs to American dollars. And that's one of the most prominent problems that diplomacy, Spanish US diplomacy has in Franco's Spain at the very beginning, as well as trying to get some of these premature anti-fascists of some political arena concentration camp. Meanwhile, as Juan Ramón and the exiles are in the US trying to present this complicated paradigm, fascist intellectuals are also presenting an imperial paradigm, a new fascist Lebensraum, a new space, a vital space, which comes out of the Monroe Doctrine, of expansion, which comes through Gibraltar and goes across the Straits onto Morocco. Okay? If Spain is to come into the world conflict, that's the minimum that they are requiring from the Nazis. And of course, this goes back to writings of intellectuals like Ernesto Jiménez Caballero, who has this book, Genio de España, in which he says, well, we are actually imperialists, but we are actually not racists, because the Roman cross will not allow to separate the races. Of course, but Charles V, who had German blood, actually may be the new Hitler, without fascist, without racist innuendo. And as this ideas and this literature about, by the way, for example, Manuel Aznar, prominent intellectual, writes, I mean, there's actually all these intellectuals, fascist intellectuals, pushing the idea of the new empire, and fully, the fire. Serrano Suñer, who is Minister of the Interior at that time, and eventually becomes Foreign Minister, too, goes to Germany. Goes to Nazi Germany, and the Wallace and cabinet members say, well, this is all over. I mean, Spain is going to go into the fascist lot. This is the Nazi twist of the time. And suddenly they come back from Berlin, and actually Hitler is just going to treat them like those British. They're just going to be another sub-colony in the world order. So why we place Britain for Nazi Germany? If we occupy Morocco, the raw materials are going to be exploited by the Axis, and we're not going to get a single cent of any of this. Let's rather look at the Allies. And there's a key figure, which is Domingo Castellier, who's at that point the Minister of Trade. And Domingo Castellier was the president of the Spanish oil monopoly in Britain and Texas. Okay. So now the bargain becomes, can we sell enough tungsten and iron, etc., and can we get it for it? And can we squeeze it by? No? And is Gibraltar going to be overrun? And the key of the Mediterranean and the war can sweep the other way, or will it not? And as you know, Franco's historians will try to manipulate this. Well, actually, yes, they are dragging their feet, but they're dragging their feet because the stakes are maybe too high, and the rewards may not be as plenty as they're supposed to. So maybe we have some interesting new offers across the Atlantic and into the northern sea. So if Germany waged a war of life and death with two major powers and did not secure the raw material requirements of the picture. So you Spanish get across. Okay, so eventually Philip's operations dropped off, and hoards gasoline that eventually goes back to the Nazis. Wolfram is extracted and exported through clandestine ways. No. And who shows up into the picture but José M, who is probably one of the most avid and conniving of the Franco's helpers, stronghold scientists, never really on the radar. He was ambassador in Paris, so he cleaned up in France. He was the one that actually made sure that Sanya could be extradited, compliant. Pero Savoia, Sanya died in his bed. And eventually he's at the helm in foreign affairs. And look what he's saying to the US ambassador in 1945. On the other hand, says Hayes, who is a historian, he felt that if the United States, now obviously the greatest military nation in the world, was to play its proper role in the post-war period, it should realistically utilize Spain as a special buffer in Europe. So they had it all figured out. And where do we find Lequerica? We find Lequerica in Washington, of course. He's the one that's going to bring US and Franco Spain unto the Madrid Accords 1953, the entrance of the United Nations 1955. And where do we find him? We find him next to Juan Ramón Jiménez, and Zenobia at one point. And Zenobia at one point says, I predicted Juan Ramón from his presence as well. Juan Ramón, he's amused by the stories Lequerica tells him about it. Okay, so the snake is moving there. And what do we get from the US government at that point? Well, the American government wished more than ever to keep the supplies low, but the British government remained at the country line. They worked together up to that point. In fact, it now forced Schwarz to get a share of that trade from British-owned companies and to secure an equal place in the administration of the system of oil control. The nations were beginning to feel themselves free to relapse into the customary commercial rivalries. All of this is going through this bilateral, trilateral talks with Juan Ramón. Yes, Wallace. And when Juan Ramón goes into a trip into America in 1948, Wallace is actually a third-party candidate. And Juan Ramón talks, and he's asked repeatedly when he goes to America, Argentina, and Uruguay about Wallace. Wallace is the great hope that never was. And we know what happened for history. So, I would like to finish the talk with one final poem by Juan Ramón Jiménez, Library de Gibraltar, and this is actually a poem that was actually put into music by the studio composer and you're going to see interpretation through the music of José M and and this was the closing moment of that symposium that we did. I don't know, volume?
The volume from the front. You hope close to volume 1.
What?
You hope close to volume 1. can get Chris, but I have to do that now.
There's something in the computer control that we don't. Open some settings. Yeah, we're getting it through.
The volume is just not coming out through here, it's a connection. It has to do with the connection over here.
Maybe this one?
It has to do with how we put it on the screen. Just the contact bottom of the video. Okay, and let's say that.
Okay, so maybe we can, if we eventually come, then we can go into the questions part and then we get there. If I can stop that.
Okay, so we should be walking through the door in a couple of seconds.
We can already start, right?
Shall we start the Q&A in the
Yeah.
meantime? Well, thank you. Very interesting. While this sorts out the sound, I think we're going to start with the Q&A. Any questions from the floor, please? Okay, we have a question over here.
Fantastic presentation. I'm sorry I had to step
Thank
out
you.
for a short minute. With the Franco in Spain, the teeter-tottering, right, between the Allies and Axis, and trying to figure out Spain's best, what's best for Spain, right? Do you think that would have gone differently had there not been the American-Spanish connection because of the exile? Would it have played out differently?
Inshallah. It is hard to tell. From the documents I have read, I mean, I can say, or I would say, from my interpretation, that the intentions of many of the U.S. officials were very far removed in a sense, also because, of course, you have all kinds of information coming from both the exchange between the Spanish embassy in Washington, the British embassy in Washington, the London, and the Rock, and the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador, and the British ambassador in Spain, etc. So, but indeed, I think with the Wallace presence in there, who was an extremely decided, and the comment in the memo is he went head and head now to this other official in the Treasury Department saying, what do you mean? We're not going to spending money, because you're looking at your stupid budget while people are getting killed, over there, or and he immediately took on. So I think Wallace and I talked to Noam Chomsky about it, and he said, well, you're sort of a social democrat, which we'll take it, But who wasn't at the time? Actually, Roosevelt was a social democrat. But I think was a decided social democrat, and indeed, he had this interesting theory, the idea of his doctrine of the Pacific, saying, well, actually, the post-war doesn't look east, needs to look west, actually. Could you actually implement that through a process of checks and balances in the U.S., in which Congress, as we know, and the Senate, could derail any presidential policy like they did with Woodrow Wilson? The U.S. never approved the idea of a society of nations. The U.S. was an observer of the idea of the U.S. president. So I think anything could have happened. I would tend to think, of course, institutions are
you know, they stand and they stay. People will come through, ideas come through. But indeed, no, Franco was really a sword in the eyes of the U.S. Democrats, and yes, I mean, clearly the winning of the war against the Axis. I mean, he was a real sword presence. Yet, British interests were paramount in this process, and furthermore, yes, indeed, you know, out of the own conniving of and actually fear of the dictator of losing what he had already gained, nothing went anywhere. I mean, he always played his cards as, okay, well, I'm not going to wake up the next day and still be at the battlefield, you know, and that's the way he did, you know, and he always hit his game.
Yeah. There's been on the Operation Felix question. So it was taken very seriously at Gibraltar, and an evacuation was put in place. And any non-essential, by then this was a second evacuation, civilians had already been evacuated. Anybody with a debilitating or progressive illness that would not survive a siege was, you know, these people were all evacuated from Gibraltar. And Gibraltar prepared for Felix as a reality. But there's a Spanish historian, Alfonso Escuadra, who last year brought out, it's a subject he's been looking into for a long time. He learned Spanish to look into all the German archives as well, to understand how and where the Poles lay. The plans for Felix were very, very well established.
Absolutely.
And the documents were all underpinned. It just needed that go-ahead.
They had trained, they had a rock in the Jura where they had trained with paratroopers. I mean, everything was set.
And Gibraltar had, there are a number of stay-behind caves where you know, a doctor, a comms expert, etc., would be bricked up to continue to report back once Gibraltar was taken. So measures had been taken here. But what Alfonso says in the end, he says, Franco was quite insecure, and I think it's insecurity you draw attention to now, because he feared, knowing that Hitler was a greater megalomaniac, I think, than he was, and a greater overreacher as well, that yes, Franco would say, come through and take Gibraltar, and in the process take Gibraltar for us, for Spain. So that would, and the trust wasn't entirely there, because he believed that Spain would become another satellite of Nazi Germany. And so there was, and also the fear that subsidies from Britain and the US would be removed, and that could bring in another civil war. So there was too much going wrong in Spain, I think, to go with this. But there's a lot of evidence of how complete this plan was. So yes, it's a really interesting subject. It's really interesting.
And again, this ideological push behind the fascist Spanish ideologues, this Levenfront idea of this new space, which is pushed every day, but yet, well, there's actually nationalism, and this can ring a bell nowadays. I always say that history may explain the miseries of the past, but it may never prevent the disasters of the present, okay? And nationalism was a big in play in that sense. That's why the discourse by the exiles like Juan Ramón is such a freshening point of view. I mean, Juan Ramón says he's not one of the 98istas. We lost Cuba, we are this depression. He says, well, the Cubans must have been quite happy that they became independent, and we got onto a new stage onto our cultural and national life. But actually, Gibraltar had to be taken by the Francoist troops. I mean, you couldn't let a foreign power do what we men with what we need to have to do, and that plays into the imaginary of the times among, of course, the structural problems that Jennifer has explained.
But you're so right, because whenever I ask Spaniards, what is this about Gibraltar? And very few can really say what it's about. We know it's a territorial claim, and we know all of that. But they say, es muy fuerte. And they can't tell you lo que es tan fuerte, and you've just said it now. It's about national pride, orgullo, the loss of Cuba and Philippines in 1898. That is a huge desagarramiento, but also a huge crisis that follows. And so the focus has since then really just been picking up on, and its positionality as well. This is a whole
absolutely, of course, which at that time was
its
key,
positionality.
no longer has that presence. It still plays, of course, but again, so you have these close territorial in a sense, because you're trying to rebuild, the idea of the empire, of course, is of course framing your mind in a sense. No, so it's closing your mind in a sense. While Exiles, like both of them, Juan Ramón,
Just expansive.
no, Exile gives you that. Above all, I mean, he already had it. No, but America, the renewing of his presence in the Americas, now getting in touch with the continental, idea, that earthy idea, that open space, and opens, your mind to the vast emptiness. And that's what, when you reread him, you say, okay, this is 1940s, okay. I mean, prior to any postmodern, etc., etc. So I think that's, there's these time-special connections that are so fascinating.
Yeah.
That we can play with them today.
Yeah. I found, if anybody has a question, I'll give way to this, or I'll ask a question now. Any questions? Okay, I'll go forward then. Yeah, just check this region. And it's something that I've always found interesting. So literature of exile and it's Spanish literature. It's literature of exile, and that's sort of like a subgenre.
Yeah, right. Where do you draw the national boundaries?
Exactly, and it's that tension, and you draw attention to the tension with those that remained actually are the real heroes here. They are the sacrifice. And so I wonder the extent to which exile is a choice as well. And if it's a choice, I know it brings about, as you say, an existentialist crisis, because you don't belong, the longing to return, and so I wonder the extent to which this not belonging, but making the choice actively at the same time to leave, preys dramatically not only on the authors themselves, but also on the genre, on the literatura del exilio, which is liminal in the scheme of things when you think about it. Yeah, so I wonder how does this sort of the tension, is it ever resolved, or does it continue?
No, and I think that's an extremely important question, because can we actually talk of literature of exile or literature in exile? No? And, or out of it, exile. No? Where do we position ourselves? And there's several positions. For example, from the vantage point of view of the Spanish 1939 exiles, Francisco Ayala said, I'm not a writer of literature of exile, and maybe I was a writer in exile, but it doesn't necessarily pertain to what I write in a sense, which can be defended. On the other hand, I mean, Juan Ramón would say, yes, I have all these registers in my writing, and I can cover them all, and actually his main book around the subject was not exile, was guerra, the idea that war was still being waged in a sense, no? And so conflict. But yes, indeed, when these intellectuals eventually got the few that were accepted, we have figures that go back and forth, but it doesn't go beyond 10,000 in the U.S. through affidavits of support, etc., and eventually they got established into already institutions that had prominent programs, from the 19th century, etc. Well, actually, exile was not their main course of interest. They actually fell back onto what was more prominent in the cultural life of Spain, which was the Golden Age, actually. And so suddenly Hispanism in the US and Hispanism in Spain did not become that different, because they were actually all, in a sense, although, of course, there was small vantage difference, in particular when you look at Americo Castro. And I think Americo Castro is a figure that needs to be vindicated and re-vindicated, in a sense. And in the introduction that I put to this book, I re-vindicate Castro, because not only I was taught by Castro's disciples, and one of them actually, I forgot to mention him and make a reference, the first editor of José Carrasco, and actually José Carrasco dies on the same day that this library set up, 1793, the siege of Gibraltar, and one of the Americo Castro's most prominent disciples was one master at the University of Pennsylvania, Russell P. Siebel, and Sam Armis did the Middle Ages. So I owe an extreme lot to Castro's ideas, and actually, regardless, of his polemics with Sanchez Albornoz, I think the clarity with which Castro presents the fact that any time a dominant group attempts to set up a cultural set frame of ideas, you are of course drawing onto the periphery, what you are being expelling, so that vividura of exclusion, that Christian vividura of exclusion, is based on Jewish matriarchy and playing root, only the chosen ones, and of course on the Muslim idea of a single, yet condescending but single God, unity of, and this is very much, and this is what I try to project onto my colleagues in the US, but probably I'm now, and with my minority, is, I'm sorry, but we may be repeating exactly the same mistakes that actually these anti-fascist Spanish were aware. Exile makes you aware. That you're always being pushed around, and there's not a particular set of a framework of this can be and this should not be, but it's the context of how we may remake our readings that eventually gives us the possibility of debating what could be at stake in the times, and what we could take for our times, again, without, as Max Estrella used to, Don Latín de España used to say to Max Estrella, sin ponernos estupendos, y estupendas, in that sense. So, it's maybe a pessimistic conclusion, but he's an optimist, really at stake. So.
Okay, so maybe we play this out now. There's some cold wine and some red wine and some little tapitas downstairs which we can have. So maybe we play this out now.
Thank you.
And we thank you.
No, I thank you all at this bright morning, at this symbolic, marvelous place, no? The library, La Librería.
Where we have George Borrows, which I use a lot, and Richard Ford, and Richard Irving.
Of course.
It's part of that other.
One of the libraries that was preserved because the Damon actually didn't come here, you know, in a sense, actually, you know, I'm one of the fortunate ones that can borrow from Harvard, you know, but there was a time in which not everybody in the library was not as active as it was. But I think this is a good way to wrap up with this Libre de Libres by Juan Ramón, Carlos José Martínez, and Ana Murphy. Let me see if I can don't move it up much. Maybe gently.
Maybe. It was just on the. If it's a news, it's just on one of the.
I don't believe it's
Go down.
Thank you.